All right, good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you're logging in from. My name is Shawn Harrison. I am a BI trainer and product expert for Pragmatic Works. And today we're just going to look at a rudimentary introduction to SSIS. Now, for most of my presentations, I usually have somewhat of a PowerPoint presentation, nothing too lengthy, but just a small PowerPoint presentation. For my introduction to SSIS, presentations that I do, my PowerPoint is incredibly small because I have so much to get through, and who really wants to stare at PowerPoint anyway? So just going through an introductory look at SSIS, what it's used for, and how to use it, basically. So first off with SSIS, what exactly is it for? Well, basically, the simple answer is mainly just data ETL. It's the extraction, transformation, and loading of data. So it's a replacement for DTS. If you remember from pre-2005, they had the data transformation services, but this is its replacement. So it's much faster, more efficient, and it's been around since 2005. So of course, it has evolved quite a bit. Now, when working with SSIS and ETL, you're going to be working within the Visual Studio environment. So within BIDS, if you're on 2005 or 2008, or for those of you that are using 2012, they've now decided to change it to SQL Server Data Tools, or SSDT. Not quite as easy or fun to say. Now, when looking at how that's used, how you're using SSDT or BIDS, how you are structuring your different BI projects. Inside of Visual Studio, you're going to be working with a solution. A solution is going to hold all the different projects. So you could have SSIS projects, an SSIS project, and an SSRS project. So analysis services, integration services, and reporting services, all inside of one solution. So kind of think about it as kind of like a bucket. And then underneath the project, that's where you're going to have the items that are specific to that project type. So in the case of SSIS, it's going to hold multiple packages. So all of your different SSIS packages, which are basically your units of work. Now, when working with an SSIS package, there are two main parts of the package that you're going to be working with. First off, you're going to have the control flow. This is going to handle the order of operations or the flow of tasks within the package. So this is going to keep everything running in the specific order that you want it. And then you're also going to have the data flow. Now, the data flow, this is where you're going to do all of your ETL. There are certain cases where you might do a little bit of ETL inside the control flow, but not very common. All the ETL mainly is going to be done inside of the data flow. So this is where you're going to be extracting data from different sources, whether it's from databases, from flat files, whatever you have, doing some sort of transformation, maybe bringing different sources together, making sure their formats match, cleaning up data that's bad, lots of different scenarios there. And then loading it into a destination. All right, so a good short introductory PowerPoint. So now we can move on to actually working inside of Visual Studio with SSIS packages. So what we're going to do is take a look at what you're going to be working with, what you have to work with here, how everything works, and just kind of throw something together so you can see what you can actually do with SSIS. All right, so inside of Visual Studio, which I have open right here. Now, also, I should probably mention, I am using SQL Server 2012, and I have Visual Studio 2012 here with SSDT. You could still be using 2008 or 2008 R2, which is very common, possibly even 2005. So there are quite a few differences between 2008 R2 and also 2012. So I will point those out here and there, just in case we do have some people that are specifically using 2008, some that are specifically using 2012, and then others that are possibly in a mixed environment. So I'll just kind of point out a few differences here and there. But first off, one of the big differences that you're going to notice is that they've finally given you options to change the interface. So you have these different color themes, which is great because I hate having a white screen blaring at me. So I can switch it to black, so it's nice and gloomy to match my spider-infested cubicle. Now, from the start page, here you're going to have the ability to open up recent projects, create new projects. So from here, I'm just going to click New Project. And it's going to ask you what kind of project you want. Hopefully for those watching, the black and gray color scheme is hopefully making everything a bit clearer to look at. So here inside of the different project types, you'll notice that you have the different templates. Now, if you have just SSIS installed, so just when you install SQL Server, you also have AS, RS, and IS. It does install part of Visual Studio for you, but you only have the business intelligence pieces. For those that have a full-blown install of Visual Studio, you'll have other template types such as Visual Basic, C#, other types of development projects. So here we just want business intelligence. You can even choose between analysis, integration, and reporting. Now mine by default is set to business intelligence. So if I'm selecting an integration services project, down at the bottom we can give this some sort of a name. So I'll just call it SSIS webinar. By default, it's going to put it inside your documents folder, which is fine for me. I really don't care. You also have the solution name. Now, when you name your project, by default, it's going to give the solution the same name, which, that's fine as well. The only time that you may really have to change the solution name is if you are incorporating different project types. Say you have an SSIS project and also a reporting services project that you plan on putting into the same solution. So I'm just going to leave the solution name the way it is. Doesn't really matter to me right now. Right, and click OK. So this creates the project for me and opens it up right here inside of SSDT. So a few different parts that you're going to be working with. So basically what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of a rundown of the environment, just in case you haven't really used SSIS that much, so you can get a better understanding of what you have in the environment, what to work with, and what everything is going to do for you. Also, I can point out some of the differences between 2008 and 2012. So everything before 2012 and then what we have now in 2012. First off, we have the Solution Explorer. This is going to list all of your different projects underneath your solution and everything you have inside of the projects. Now, by default, you'll see I have my solution name here, but by default, that solution name isn't shown there. Typically, it's only going to show you all of the, just the project names. So like in this case, it would normally show by default SSIS_webinar as my project. You can, however, show the solution name by just an option that you have under Tools. Down here at the bottom, you have Options. And within Options, you'll have the ability to show the solution name. So actually right under here, under Projects and Solutions, you'll see the option to always show the solution name. I like to turn that on just for situations in which I am working with multiple projects in one solution, so I always remember what the solution is actually called. So normally going to be helpful when the solution name is different than the project name. Now also in this case we have the SSIS packages. So since we are working with an SSIS project, we'll have all the different packages. Anytime you create a package, you'll have a whole list of each package you create here. And you'll also have a folder for connection managers. Now we're going to talk a little bit about this too, because it's one of those differences that you're going to see between 2012 and pre-2012. If you are on 2008 or 2008 R2 or even 2005, this folder right here would say, I want to say it says shared connections, and then down towards the bottom, you'll have connection managers. It's still the same concept here in 2012. They just kind of changed the layout a bit, changed the names around. Basically, if you're on 2008, and this is only for those that are on something before 2012, if you guys see that shared data connection, the shared connection managers up here, if you create a connection just by right-clicking and choosing New Connection right there, what it's going to do is create a new connection for you that is, to an extent, shared by multiple packages. And what that means is I can create a bunch of different packages. I can pull a connection manager from my shared connections to be used in any of those packages. And then if I have to make a change to the connection, say like a password changes to a server, or a username needs to change that I'm using for a connection, all I have to do is just change it in one spot right up here, and it will take effect in every instance, every package where that connection is being used. The alternative, right down here, and this also goes for 2012, is just the single connection managers. If you create a connection down here by right-clicking and choosing New Connection, it's going to give you pretty much the same wizard that walks you through creating a connection, but it's only going to be specific to the package in which you created it. So if I have 10 different packages and I've created the same connection in every one of them with the connection managers, and there's a change that needs to be made to that connection, I have to go to all 10 packages to make that change. Now in 2012, it has the same kind of concept, but it's called a project level connection, which is a connection manager that can be used by every package in the project. And it works a little bit different than 2008, but that really gets more into when you start deploying your projects, because of the different deployment models that they have. So that's just a quick little thing there, a little blurb I have on the difference between connection managers and shared connections for those of you on pre-2012. So here we have the SSIS packages, and I can just right-click on that and create new packages. However, every time it creates one, it will call it package, or package 1, package 2, package 3, so on and so forth. And you never want to leave it that way. You always want to make sure you go in and change the package name. I'm just going to call this intro, which works for me. Now, all I had to do on that was just right-click, choose rename, and I could change the name of the package. Now, those of you that are on 2008 and before, when you do that, you may have a message box that pops up saying change the package object name as well, which you always want to click yes. There's never any reason to click no, and I don't know why they gave you that option back then. But fortunately, they fixed that. All right, so we have a package name, and here we have our environment. So we have the control flow that I mentioned, which is your starting point. This is going to handle the flow of the different package or the different objects used in the package or tasks. And then we have the data flow. Now, those in 2012, you'll also have parameters. Not really going to mention that too much here, but just to be aware, parameters is 2012 only. All right, so with the control flow, again, this is going to store all of your different tasks. It has the order of operations. It's going to control, what task executes in what order. And then over to the left, we have the SSIS toolbox. This is going to contain all of your different tasks. So here, you're going to have a lot of different things. Now, also another little disclaimer here. Seeing as how I do work for Pragmatic Works, I'm also going to have some of the Pragmatic Works products installed. And this is when you're going to see a few little things that you're not going to have in your environment, but you should, such as Task Factory. So all of this here that starts with TF, this is all something of ours. It's custom components. So for now, you can just ignore that, but definitely go read about it later. So you can ignore those. Now also in 2012 and before, a little difference between 2012 and pre-2012. They did change the layout and how the tasks are organized. So for those of you that are on 2005 and 2008, the organization of these different tasks is more than likely going to be quite a bit different. Same tools for the most part, they just put them in different orders, basically. So this is all different tasks. You are going to notice that what's in the toolbox is going to change once we start creating data flows. All right, so first thing that I want to do in this package, so we'll just throw together a sample package here. First thing I want to do is create a connection. So I can do this in a few different ways. I can create a connection manager down here at the bottom just by right-clicking. And I can choose one of my common connections here, such as an OLDB, flat file, ADO.NET, Or if I don't need any of these, maybe I want a more broad choice or something different that I'm looking for, I can choose New Connection, which will load an entire list of different types of connection managers. So here you're going to see lots of different things, just ADO, Excel connections, HTTP, FTP, ODBC, lots of different things you're going to see here. And in fact, I think 2012 they may have actually added some of them. Now, by default, you're pretty much going to have all of the different connection types that you're going to need, by default. These are also referred to as providers. Now, there may be certain situations in which you might have to connect to something a little more unusual, or you might need a certain type of Oracle connection, or you might be connecting to something such as SAP. In those cases, you will end up having to find those different providers and downloading them. Most providers are free. You will find in some cases some more obscure providers that you will end up having to pay for in some cases. So in my case, I'm just going to right-click and choose New OLDB Connection. All right, so when you choose an OLDB connection, a lot of cases you'll either have nothing here at all under those data connections, or you might have something there. So like in this case, you can see that I have been working in some other projects creating connection managers, so those are going to show up as being pre-created, and I can choose them if I want. Or I could delete them, which I'm going to do. So I'm starting fresh. So again, I right-click down here and chose a new OLDB connection. So in this OLDB connection, if I click New right here in the Connection Manager, just brings up the different providers. So I can choose different types of OLDB providers, which I'm just sticking with the native client. And then the server name. Now, I'm just connecting to something on my local machine, so local host will work for me. You can also put in a server name or an IP address if you're connecting to a different server. Also, you'll have different authentication types, Windows or SQL Server. I'm just set to use Windows authentication. And then you have the database on that server. In my case, I'm going to keep it simple and go with an AdventureWorks 2012 database. So all the examples that I'm going to be showing you here, this example package that we're going to build, is really just going to be pulling from, just an AdventureWorks database. So I can test the connection. Everything is good. And okay, so I have my connection manager here. And you'll see it show up down here at the bottom. I can also change the name if I want, if I just want to get rid of localhost. Doesn't really matter. I can really do whatever I want with the name. I'll leave it as is. So now I have a connection. So once we start working with data, I can access any of the data on that server. Now, I'm going to pull in a data flow task. So we'll just jump right into a data flow. Now, I brought in the data flow task. You'll notice that there is a tab for the data flow right up here. And to show you, if you don't have a data flow task out here and you click that, it tells you don't have it. And you can click the link to just automatically add one in. Whereas you could also just drag in a data flow task and then click the data flow task tab, or you could also double click the data flow tab or task and it jumps right in. All right. Now, inside of the data flow task, you will have a drop-down menu that will display all of your data flows, so you don't have to go back to the control flow every time you want to change to a new data flow task. Also, as mentioned before, you will notice that the toolbox does change drastically when you're inside of a data flow. Again, you're going to see more of these task factory components. You can ignore those. But this is where you're doing all of your ETL. So this is where we're extracting data, transforming it, and loading it into something else. So you're going to find more objects here in the data flow than what you'll see inside of the control flow. So we're going to put together kind of a simple package to kind of give you an idea of the different types of components that you're going to be working with. Because there are lots of different components and transforms inside of the data flow. So I'm going to give you a pretty good mix of tasks here so you can get a good idea of the different types of things you're going to see inside the data flow. So first, let me find the source. We're going to need a source, pull data from. So right down here for 2012 in other sources, I can choose OLDB source. and just drag it and drop it in. Now with all of these different tasks and transforms, and also remember, in the control flow it's referred to as a task. In the data flow, it's referred to as a component or a transform. And for all of these, if you just click right on the name, you can go in and change the change the name to whatever you want. Which, typically it's a good idea to have some sort of a naming convention for your tasks and components. For our purposes, though, I'm just going to leave it as is. Now, inside of the data flow, if you double-click that, it opens right up. Here we're going to have the connection manager. Now, you'll see it has selected a connection manager for me already, since it's the only one in the package. I do, however, have the option to create a new one, just like I did before. But if I do it from within the source, it's going to bring me right up to an OLDB connection manager, since this is an OLDB source. So just another option you have when creating a data source or a connection manager. And then you're going to have your data access modes. So there are different ways of pulling data from a source. You can just choose a table or a view from SQL Server. You also have the option to choose a table name or a view from a variable. Then there's a SQL command and a SQL command from variable. Typically, you're going to find either table or view or SQL command. SQL command is also very popular, especially when you get into performance tuning. This is where you can basically just enter a select statement to grab just what you want from the tables. So for me, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to go with a table. So in the next dropdown for the table or view name, I'm going to pull data from production.product. So I'm pulling from the product table in InventionWorks. Next we have the columns. So when you select that, you're going to have a list of all the different columns that's coming out of that table. So if you were doing a select statement, then you would just see the columns that you specifically named in the select statement. But in this case, since I am choosing a table name, it's basically like doing a select star from the table. So here, you're going to have a list of all the columns, and you can go through and select or deselect the different columns depending on what you need. So if I didn't need product number or safety stock level, things like that, I can uncheck them. Now, just a little tip here as well as far as the performance tuning side of it goes, is a lot of people will choose a table, and then they'll just go through and deselect the columns that they don't need, and they're under the impression that it will only pull the data across the network from the columns that they're selecting, which actually is inaccurate. What you're doing here, when you're deselecting these different column names, when you're unchecking them, it's basically applying a client-side filter. So it's still going to pull everything out of that table, but then when it gets to your workstation, here in bids, when you're running the package, then it's going to drop all those columns. So if you're going for performance, always use a select statement. But for our purposes, I'm going to keep this all selected. Now, in all of your sources, and also some of your other transforms and destinations, you'll have what's called an error output. Now, the error output, by default, is set to fail the component. So if you have an issue, if there's some sort of a problem with one of the columns that you are, one of the rows that you're pulling out of the table, then based on the column, you can set that to behave in different ways. So by default, again, all the columns are set to fail component. So something's wrong with one of the columns, SSIS doesn't like it, it fails the component, and in most cases fails the package. So on error, if you did need to change this, you also have the option to ignore the failure. You can redirect that row somewhere else as well, which is pretty common. You will see a lot of that. I'm going to keep everything to fail component. But if I were to set one of these to a redirect row, then I will end up having two different outputs coming from the source, one green, one red. Red, of course, being the errors. But I'll just leave it as is and click OK. So now we have the source. The little red X that was over here has gone away, and now we can pull data out of that. All right, so next thing I want to send it to. We have lots of different transforms, and I want to give you guys a good mix of transforms to look at. So I'm going to send this down to a very common but also not so great transform, which is the sort transform. So the sort transform, this is going to basically reorder the data and arrange it by any, whichever way you tell it to. Now, when I drag that in, you'll see I also dragged a little arrow from the source down to the next transform. That's referred to as a data flow path. So here, basically, I'm just telling it, take my data and drag it down here. Now, in the sort transform, when I open that up, here you'll have the input columns. This is what we're pulling out of the source. And you'll have checkboxes next to them. So here we're just going to tell it what we want to sort by. And I'm going to choose the product ID in this case. So I want to sort by the product ID. Now, you can choose multiple columns to sort on. So basically, it gives like a sort order. So right here, you'll see it puts that column down towards the bottom. It lists it at the bottom here, and you'll see the option of sort order. So we're basically saying that first we're going to sort on the product ID. Now, if I wanted to, if I took, say, like name, possibly, for lack of a better option here, you'll see it adds the second column, or the second row, basically. In this case, kind of a row format anyway. And the sort order showing is 2. So it would sort by the product ID first, and then sort by the name second. So, but in this case, we don't really need to sort by multiple values. We're just going to sort on the product ID. Now, the sort transform, really all that's going to do for you is sort the data. But in a lot of cases, you're going to find that people try to avoid the sort transform. We'll talk a little bit about that later as we move on through when I talk about different types of transforms. But just remember, sort, one of those things you want to try to avoid. Okay, so after the sort, let's see what columns we have in here again. Let's see. All right, after the sort, let's go with a derived column. Now, a derived column, this is one you definitely want to get familiar with, because the derived column is probably one of the most used transforms you have in SSIS. And the derived column is basically going to let you manipulate data in different ways. Now, when I open this up, this is basically showing you an expression editor. So here's where you get into some SSIS expressions. Now, inside of the derived column, in pretty much anything that uses SSIS expressions, you're going to have a list of variables, in the package, which we're not really going to touch on that too much. And then you'll also have a list of columns that you're working with. And then over to the right, you'll have all kinds of different functions and operators that you can use to manipulate data in different ways. So the expression language can be quite a pain because it's just unusual. It's almost like, basically it uses certain features and certain characteristics of Visual Basic, and also has certain features and characteristics of C#, and they just cram them all together. So it's one of those things that doesn't really make sense a whole lot of times. And I would say that the learning the SSIS expression language is probably the biggest learning curve when it comes to SSIS, because it can be challenging. Now, in this case, with the derived column, you can do pretty much anything you want when manipulating data, so certain values of fields. So I basically am going to use this to change some of my null values. Now, I've done a lot of stuff with the AdventureWorks tables, so this table I'm pretty familiar with. And I know that in the production table, there are lots of null values for the color column. So we're going to use the derived column to change null values to something different, like unknown or something like that. So first off, you have down towards the bottom the derived column name. This you really don't have to mess with unless you're creating a new column, because the derived column, when it's manipulating data, it can give you a brand new column, or it can change data that you have already in an existing column. So the derived column field, this is where you're going to tell it exactly what it's going to do. So when I click on that, you get this drop-down menu. Here you can add a new column, or you can replace any one of these other columns. And I'm shooting for the color column. All right, so replace color, and you'll see it populates that already. And it's also going to tell you automatically the data type of that column and the length that it's set to. So this is coming from SQL Server. And the SQL Server table, it is DTWSTR data type. Unicode string, and also a length of 15. Now that right there comes in handy because, and you'll probably see it the next time we work with expressions, I'll throw something in there about that. So in the expression here, I want to do basically an if statement or an if then else statement, or if then, or whatever you want to call it. Sorry, I'm running on like 4 shots of espresso, so I'm feeling good. So inside of the expression column here, we're going to add an expression to apply to the color column. So here we're going to check for nulls. Now when doing that, you can grab different features up here, different functions and operators. Like you'll see right here we have this folder of null functions. And you can do this in different ways. I could just drag this down, click and drag down to the expression field, or I could just type in is null. You could really do it either way. So I'm just going to drag is null and drop it into the expression field. And now you'll see where it says expression right there. This is just a placeholder, basically. So what we're going to say here is null, and we're looking at the color column. So we just want to put color there. And you can drag your columns down here as well, and just drop it on expression. Or you could just delete expression and type in color. So you'll see is null, color. So basically it's looking at the color column, and if the value is null. And here's where things get a little weird. So if the value is null, I want to put a question mark. So that stands for then. So if it's null, then, and we have to have some sort of value. So when you're putting in a hard-coded value with the expression language, you're going to use double quotes. So double quotes, unknown is what I want to replace it with. Right here. Now also while I'm typing this, you'll notice that it's turned red. One really nice thing, well, yeah, I guess it's pretty nice. One of the few nice things about using the expression language is inside of the expression editors, if you click away from that expression and it's like an expression that's not typed correctly, it will highlight in red and it won't let you go any further. So it will tell you before you try to go and run a package that, hey, your expression is messed up and it's not going to work. Now it will even tell you what it is when you hover the mouse over it. Unfortunately, you got to read that in about 3 or 4 seconds. Yeah, there it goes. Basically, you're going to want to zoom in quite a bit if you have some sort of tool to freeze the screen. So then you can kind of quickly skim down and see what the problem is. So just want to give you a little heads up on that. It will turn red when it doesn't work. So to finish this, we have if color is null, then we want to change the value to unknown. Else, we just want that to remain the current value. So drag color down there again. And I will zoom in on that. So basically, again, we're saying if the color column, if that value is null, then we're going to replace it with unknown. And you have the colon here. Or else, it's going to stay its current value. So that's an if then else statement using the SSIS expression language. All right, so that's all we need to do there. Click OK. And we have our derived column. All right, so now we're going to take a look at another very commonly used component, which is the lookup transform. Now, the lookup transform, this is used for joining data together. You could use it for bringing in new columns. You can use it for populating different columns based on other tables. So over to the left, I'm dragging in a lookup transform. And I'll go ahead and connect that up. Inside of the lookup, if you double-click that, there's a few different options that you can set here. First off, under General, you're going to have a cache mode. You don't really have to worry too much about this. Full cache means it's just caching all of this in memory. Partial cache will just cache part of it, of course, and then no cache at all. Typically you don't have to really change this very much unless you're using a very large data set. You know, we're working with something small. It's not even 1,000 rows, I don't think, so we can keep full cache. It's fine. And then you have a connection type. Since we're using full cache, we're just going to keep it with or keep it on OldDB Connection Manager. And then down towards the bottom, we have specify how to handle rows with no matching entries. Because basically what we're doing here is we're going to try and bring more data in based on a column from our main table that matches a column over in our reference table. So of course, there will be cases where you don't have any kind of match over there. So what do you want to do with it? By default, it is set to fail the component. But typically you're going to do something different with that. And our options here are to ignore that failure, so we can still just keep them moving through with everything else. You can redirect the rows to an error output, or you can also redirect the rows to a no match output. That basically just gives you two different outputs to work with, and you can send them down different paths. For our purposes, I'm going to stick with ignore failure, because I'm basically just going to bring in data from this other table, but if there's no match for it, oh well, who cares? And next we have the connection. Since we're going with an OLDB connection, it's going to use a connection manager. So this is where we're pointing it to a table that we would like to bring in another column to our data flow. And then you choose what table you're using for your lookup. And let's see, I want to choose something like, let's see what we have. There's a product document table. It sounds like it could be useful. So we'll connect to this product document table. Now, you also have the option of using a SQL query as well. So again, that's more on the performance tuning side, but you do have the option of using a select statement. But I'm just going to use the product document table name. So next we have the columns field, or the column section. Here's where we're going to actually join the data together, what we're going to use for the join, and what columns from our other table would we like to return. So here's the table, here's our product table, and then we have the product document table. Now here we're going to use a column that matches, which in this case you can see it's very easy. The product ID column for the production.product table also exists in the product documents table. So we'll just basically click on product ID and just drag it right over to product ID over here. So that's going to be what we use to perform the lookup. And I'll just return, looks like document node might be the only thing different really. So if you check that, you're basically selecting the column that you would like to return. If you can definitely return multiple columns if needed. But for our purposes, I'm just going to return one column here. So it's going to bring that into our main data flow. You also, down at the bottom, have the option of changing the name, so you can alias that column if you have to. And you also have the option of using the data from that column to replace an existing column in some cases, if there's a matching column here. But for our purposes, I'm just adding it as a new column. All right, and click OK. All right, so far so good. And now we're going to go into a conditional split. I'll probably send it down that way. Conditional split is another very commonly used component. This one is another one that uses the expression language. And a conditional split is going to be used when you cancel that for a second. I have to explain that. Conditional splits are going to be used for, of course, splitting data based on some sort of a condition. It's kind of obvious. But basically, like if you're looking for certain characteristics of your data, you're looking for certain values for a column, and you can split them based on that. Now, when coming out of a lookup transform, and I take the little blue arrow here, green if you're on pre-2012, and drag it down to the conditional split. Okay, it's not letting go. Oh, let go. That was irritating. All right, drag that down again. There we go. Here you're going to have to choose the output. Now in our case, we really only have one output because we're continuing, we're pushing everything through, we're ignoring failures. So all we have to deal with is the lookup match output. Now if we had chosen redirect entries of no matches to a no match output, then we would have two matches to work, or two different outputs to work with. So I'm just going to select lookup match output, okay, and sends it right into the conditional split. All right, now the conditional split. It looks a lot like the derived column, almost exactly, because again, this is using the SSIS expression language. Now in this case, I want to split my data into two different outputs. You can have multiple outputs coming out of here. I could search for, say I could look for every different color value that I have, and I could split those off into their own separate paths, really, if I wanted to. So I could really get as many outputs as I want here. However, what I'm going to do with this one is look for products that are showing up as a product that we create. So I know inside of the product table, we do have a column here called make flag, which is in there somewhere. I'll just type it in, but I know it's there somewhere. There we go, make flag, which is just a Boolean value set to true or false. So basically, if it's true, it's a product we make. If it's false, I believe it's supposed to be something that has been discontinued or something. So I'll use the make flag as my basis for splitting the data. All right, so in this case, we have the output name. Now, the output name, you're just giving the output some sort of a name. This is useful when you are, say, splitting by color, because you could just, give each output the name of whatever color it is you're looking for. So in this case, I'll just call it, I'll just call this discontinued. So that's the name of my condition, or the output. Now down towards the bottom in the conditional split, you'll see at the bottom we have default output names. You'll always have another output. And this is going to be for anything that doesn't match your conditions, so all the extra stuff. And you can change that too. So conditional split default output, and I can just call this current. So discontinued, everything else is going to be current. So now with the condition, I'm looking for the make flag, and the make flag is either going to be set to, I believe in the database, or in that table, it's set to 1 or 0. So I'm going to drag down the make flag column, drop that in condition, and now we want to look for make flag values that are set to 0. So in the SSIS expression language, you have to do 2 equal signs. So make flag equal equal. So this is basically doing a comparison, saying if make flag equals, say, 0, for example. If we have just 1 0, then as far as SSIS is concerned, that means you want to try and change the value to 0, which isn't going to work here in this editor. So you want to do a double equal sign as a comparison. And since we are looking for a hard-coded value, we'll just do a double quote, 0, double quote. All right, so all we're saying is make flag double equal 0, right? But you notice I click away from it, and it's still red. So it's saying that something is wrong with this expression. And of course, if you hover over it, it's just going to give you, the message. Now, however, in this message, you'll see that it's telling me that the data types dtbool, so it's a Boolean value, and dtwstr are incompatible for the binary operator. So basically what it's telling me is make flag is set to binary, but this is a hard-coded value that I entered. So by default, it puts that in as a Unicode string. And that's not going to work. It has to match. The data types have to match in order to do any kind of comparisons. So here's where we get to have some fun with casting. This one's going to be a very simple one, because we only have one value that we have to change the data type. So in the list of folders up at the top, you're going to see a folder for typecasts. And this is how you're going to change the value of this 0, or not the value, but change the data type of this value that we're putting here. So under typecasts, if I just kind of drill through there a bit, you'll find what we're looking for is dtbool right here. So this is a Boolean value. We want to basically convert this to Boolean. Now, when using the typecasts, it's pretty simple. All you're going to do is just drag it and drop it in front of the value that you would like to convert. So this is what it's going to look like. Here's how we're setting up the expression. So make flag equal equal dtbool and then 0. So the cast always goes in front of what you want to convert. Now when I click away, you can see everything's good. It's happy now. All right, and so we'll click OK. All right, so we have basically, we're pulling data out of a table, sending it down to a sort, then to a derived column, and a lookup to bring in some more information, and then down to a conditional split. This is where we're going to split the data out. Now, you can do this in different ways. I mean, or you can send these to different types of destinations. This might be something that I want to send to different tables or I might want to send them to flat files, whatever I want to do there. In fact, with this one, just to show you some of the destinations, every source you're going to have, or almost every source that you're going to have available to you here inside of the data flow task, is going to have some sort of an equivalent destination. So Excel sources and destinations, OLDB, ODBC. So here we have the OLDB destination. I'm going to drag out 2 of these because we're going to need them. And with the conditional split, when I drag one of the arrows over here and connect it, it's going to ask which output do I want to send there? And here's the different conditions. Do I want to send my current condition there or the discontinued condition? So which one of these outputs? I'm just going to go with current for now. So current products are going to go this route. Okay. And then when I click on it again, I can pull that arrow over to the next one. There we go. And since I only had 2 conditions, it defaults to whichever one is left. All right, now inside of the destination, here's where we can point to a table, or you can actually use this editor to create a new table, which is incredibly useful. It's an easy way to go. So I'm actually going to change this. Let's see, I've got some other database. No, I'll just keep it in here. Okay, yeah, I'll just keep it in here. So I'm pointing to my AdventureWorks database. But you'll see right here next to the name of the table or view, you have the new option. So if I click that, it's going to give me the script. So it's going to create that table for me. Of course, you will see it defaults to OLDB destination. But I'm going to switch that to, let me just change that name to current products. Or I'll just call it current. It's fine. I'll get rid of it later anyway. So current, I'll just call the table current. Okay? It creates it for me. And when you click on mappings, you'll see you have all of the mappings here. So it creates that table. And it automatically maps the columns for you since they're all named the same. All right, so click OK there. I'm going to do the same thing over here for my discontinued products. Create a new table. I'm going to call this one, of course, discontinued. And OK. All right. Take a look at the mappings. We're good to go there. Okay, so still have a few minutes left, and there's still a few important parts I want to get through. So we are going to execute this package here in just a second and take a look at what we actually get, what it's going to do. Now, when it comes to executing packages, if I jump back out here to the control flow, you can see I have my data flow task here, and I can execute the package by clicking the Start button right up here, which you never want to do. It's bad. Don't do it. Don't get into that habit, because it could kick off other objects in different projects if you're mixing projects together. The better way, though, is over here to the right under your package list. If you right-click a package, you'll have the option to where to go? Execute package right here at the top. So you can execute the package there. You could also right-click just on the task that you want and execute the task. You can do that here. You could also do it from within the task, for data flows anyway, just right-clicking out here in the open and choosing Execute Task. So different ways to do that. Now, we put a lot of different transforms in here. Well, not a lot, but a few different transforms. And I want to show you how you can actually view the information and know that what we set up is actually working. So to do that, to view the information, you can use what's called a data viewer. And this is another thing that you really want to get used to using. And I'm not going to put them all through the package here. I'm going to first off do it before and after the derived column. Because if you remember, with the derived column, all we're doing is looking for null values for color and changing it to unknown. So what I want to do is put one before, and in order to add a data viewer, all you have to do is just right-click. Now, they simplified this in 2012. In 2012, for those of you on 2012, if you right-click on it, you'll have the option right here in the menu to enable the data viewer. If you're on 2008, you'll have an option for data viewers, and it pulls up a box asking which type. You will see a few different ones. Most of them are, I think there's 3 or 4, I can't quite remember. Most of them are totally useless. You'll just want to click on Grid View, and it adds a grid view for you. So here I'm just going to choose Enable Data Viewer, and you'll see it puts that little magnifying glass there. And I'm going to put one after the drive column. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and execute this. Let's see. Here we go. Execute the task. Keep your fingers crossed, and let's see what we get. All right. So here we have our first data viewer. And in this data viewer, you'll see right up at the top, well, got that tooltip there, right up at the top of the list for color, you'll see we have all these null values here. That's what we're looking for. All right, so when using data viewers, you can click the green button, which will continue on. I could detach it, or I could just close it out. Which here, I'll just close it out. And the next one pops up. So this is the one we have after the derived column. And if we look, you can see those null values are now switched to unknown. So our expression is working. It's taking those null values and it's switching it to unknown. All right, so it's moved all the way through. Now, also you'll notice with the when watching it inside of the data flow, it's telling you how many rows it pulled from the source. So how many rows have gone from this transform to this one, and it'll do that all the way through the package. You see, we pulled out 504 rows. We sent it all the way down to our conditional split, and you can see it splits them for us. 239 went this way, 265 went this way, all based on the make flag value. So you can see how quickly that went. It was only 504 rows, but it was pretty fast, and how the different types of transforms work. Now, also, you'll eventually get into different types of transforms, such as blocking and non-blocking, which basically, I think is a little more in-depth than what we're covering here, but it will kind of dictate what transforms you want to use in different situations. Now, also another note on using the control flow. So you can see we didn't do much here. All we did was add a data flow. But let's just say that I do need to truncate a table. As you can see, I loaded 2 tables. With this package, we loaded 2 tables. Let's just say before we run this package again, we want to truncate those tables. So I'll pull out the execute SQL task up at the top. Depending on which version you're using, I'm going to pull out 2 of these. So inside of these transforms, just to give you an idea how it works in these last few minutes, we have the connection type, OLDB in this case. You can choose a connection manager and then add a SQL statement. So in this case, I want to choose our connection manager that we have. And my SQL statements, I'm just going to say truncate table. What was that first one? Current, I think. So we're going to truncate the current table. That's all we have to do here. So I'll click OK, close that out. That one's good to go. The next one will have basically the same thing, pointing to the same connection manager. And we're going to call this one, or we'll type in this one, truncate table discontinued. Hopefully I spelled it right earlier, because something's telling me I did not. All right, so we'll just close that out. So maybe we can see what happens if our package fails. That'll be useful. All right, so here I can set this up in different ways, because remember the control flow is your order of operations. So I could put these in order like this and drag these arrows from one to the next. These arrows, this is what's keeping everything in line. It's called a precedence constraint. So it means that this finishes. If it's successful, because this is green, then the next one goes. And if that's successful, then the next one can go. And so on and so forth. You can also change your constraints. So you can have a failure constraint, which means if this fails, then do the next one. And also one that's a completion constraint. Basically, I don't care how it finished. If it finished in whatever state it's in, move on to the next one. You can also have containers, which those can be pretty useful. You can have what's called a sequence container, which is where you take components that can run in parallel, but it will make sure that all the components run, or all the tasks run first before moving on to the next one. So different ways you can do it. So in this one, if I just go and execute the package now, something tells me I may have misspelled a table name, and it looks like I did. You'll see it fails. Now, 2012, it's just going to get this nice little red X over it. Pre-2012, it's going to light up like a Christmas tree because you're going to have a whole green piece here and then a whole red piece there. So I probably misspelled the table because I thought I caught that earlier before I saved the table name. So what we'll do is just remove that one, and you'll see what happens when you run a whole package. If I just right-click, execute the package. Oh, forgot about the data viewers. So I'll close that out, and there we go. So you can see the package finishes successfully, and I can just stop that. All right. So it looks like we're down to 3 minutes. So that's really all the time that I have. It was a lot to cover. Hopefully I didn't go too fast, but usually with an intro session it does take a lot of time. But I'd like to thank everyone for attending. I have a problem viewing questions, unfortunately, for some reason in GoToWebinar, but I will get to all those questions, and I can answer those in a blog and get those posted up later on as well.
Okay, great.
Right,
yep, we do have a few questions, so I'll be sure to send those right over to you, Shawn, so you can follow via blog post. And thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Shawn, for a great session.
Excellent. Thanks for attending, everyone.
Thanks.
Oh,
Bye.
and also for those in the, since I didn't have a slide that does show my blog, let me just put that in the chat section. It's at bidn.com/blogs/ what is my name actually? Oh, Shawn Harrison. All one word.
All right, awesome. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Shawn.
You're welcome. Thanks for attending, everyone.